All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this webinar on threshold signatures and elevating cryptocurrency wallet security. The format today is we're going to spend about roughly 20 minutes going through the slides, just providing a quick orientation around the whole topic, and then about 10 minutes for a live interactive demo. And from there, we can take questions and answers. So you should find a Q&A tab on your interface, and please feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar, and we'll make sure we should have plenty of time to answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. On our webinar today will be Amit Tunkay, Sepior's Chief Executive Officer, and Jacob Pagter, who's our Chief Technical Officer and one of the co-founders of Sepior, and then myself, Frank Weiner. When we look at what's been going on with cryptocurrency thefts, I think it's fair to say that the thefts have become very significant and they're increasing over time. If we look at the cumulative losses that have occurred from exchange thefts since the inception of Bitcoin in 2008, roughly $1.5 billion has been stolen from the exchanges. What's even more concerning is half of that total happened just last year. So as much happened last year as the prior 9 years, if you will. So clearly, this is a problem that's getting more significant over time. If we look at 2018 in more detail, 96% of the total losses were associated with thefts from cryptocurrency exchanges as opposed to individual wallets. And it shouldn't be too shocking because clearly the exchanges are where the big money's at. But still, you'd also expect the exchanges to be providing the highest level of security. So it's definitely an area of concern. If you look at those losses on a daily basis, that means roughly 2.7 million was stolen every single day of the year, which is a 13-fold increase from what we had seen in 2017. So I think it's safe to say that there's a need for more effective security. And when it comes to cryptocurrency security, we're really talking about private key security, because the private keys are what are used to generate the signature that actually authorizes the debit or deduction of coins from an account. And when we think about the private key security for signatures, there's really a handful of solutions available. The default is typically a single signature approach, which has one approver with a single key. And when that key is used to generate the signature, the transaction executes. And this is used for the vast majority of transactions today. And it's the easiest to implement, but clearly it's the lowest in terms of the level of security it offers, because if the holder of that one key gets hacked, then the adversary can steal the coins associated with the account. Now, MultiSig introduces a multi-party approval scheme, and this was specified by the original Bitcoin specification back in 2008. And here we have multiple approvers, each with their own key. So we end up with multiple keys that generate multiple signatures, each of which that are recorded as part of the transaction. And MultiSig dramatically increases the security over what's achievable with a single signature approach. But it does have a number of undesirable attributes that we'll talk more about as we go through the presentation. More recently, threshold signatures, or ThresholdSig, is really a fairly new entrant in the security options for transaction security. And threshold signatures introduce the same multi-party approval schemes that we had with MultiSig, but the implementation is different and results in really a single key generating a single signature. So what you find is ThresholdSig offers the multi-party approval attributes of MultiSig, but it results in a single signature on-chain, like a single signature. And it's interesting, these attributes actually result in enabling the achievement of the highest level of security, because it really offers all of the upsides of MultiSig without the downsides of MultiSig. And to understand MultiSig and some of the concerns a little bit better, it's probably effective to go ahead and just take a look at an example in action. And here we have three different approvers: the end user, the exchange, and a trusted third party. And each will have a private key that can be used to generate their signature to approve the transaction. And when that happens, it's typically initiated by the end user through an app on their mobile device. And through their app, they're going to initiate the transaction, and that will then take the local key and use it to generate a signature, which is recorded on the transaction record as an ECDSA signature associated with that approver. It'll also send notification to the exchange that a transaction has been requested, and they'll go through and authenticate and verify that the end user has provided the proper credentials and met whatever criteria was specified before they would approve the transaction. And if that criteria is satisfied, their local key will be used to generate a second signature, which is again recorded on the transaction record. So at this point, what we have is two approvers. And what I don't think I mentioned early on was the most common form of multisig is a 2 out of 3 approval model, where up to 3 parties are able to approve a transaction, but a minimum of 2 have to participate in that approval. So at this point, with 2 signatures, the transaction is added to the block, and the block is sent to miners for processing. And the trusted third party in this case doesn't need to take any action, unless, of course, perhaps the end user delegates and asks them to initiate a transaction on their behalf, that type of thing. So with multisig, the obvious benefit is, rather than being concerned that a single approver gets hacked, the adversary would actually have to hack both the exchange and each of the end users. And that's why the overall security level is dramatically increased with the 2 out of 3 multisig, because it's substantially harder to do that than it is to obviously penetrate a single user. But there are some trade-offs that come with that. And some of the concerns around multisig really are rooted around the fact that multiple ECDSA signatures are recorded on the chain as part of the transaction record. One of the first issues that comes up is the ECDSA signatures are actually substantial in size, speaking from a digital context. And the result is the transaction size increases substantially. Now, even if you're applying compression techniques to the public key or using pay-to-script hash or other techniques to minimize that signature size, typically a 2 out of 3 multisig is going to be at least 23 to 63% larger than a single signature transaction. And what that means is, with a fixed length block, fewer transactions can be put in a given block. And since miners charge a fee per transaction, if fewer transactions fit within a block, they're going to expect to be paid a higher fee for multisig transactions. And that's in the case of a 2 out of 3. If you have 3 or more approvers, obviously the transaction size continues to increase, and it really becomes pretty much impractical to implement it, certainly for the very high frequency daily trading activity that dominates the transaction landscape. Another key issue here is the fact that these security policy updates are effectively recorded on-chain, because basically the key management is being done on the public blockchain. And folks who are familiar with security recognize that the less information you provide to adversaries, the better. But with multisig, you're basically showing them the schedules with which you're administering changes, how many parties are participating. They've got visibility to all the moves, adds, and changes that are happening with regard to the key management. And ultimately, that has the potential to increase security risks. For the end user, it also has the unfavorable attribute of leaving a breadcrumb trail that can actually erode their privacy of their transactions. And then finally, it's not much of an issue today because the bulk of transactions are really the buying and selling of Bitcoin around the valuation fluctuations of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency itself. But as this moves into a more mainstream currency that's used to buy and sell goods and services, businesses tend to want to publish a standard fixed address to their customers for their payments. And with all these changes in the key, the address is continuously changing or frequently changing with multisig, which is a bit problematic for business customers who are going to want static addresses. So if we move on to threshold signatures, one of the first concepts to understand or be familiar with is the concept of multi-party computation. In multi-party computation, is basically an approach where multiple parties participate collectively in a compute function, providing their inputs toward that function, but without ever sharing their inputs with the other parties or any other third party. And this is a technique that's done to preserve the secrecy or the privacy of the data held by these individual parties. And in the case of threshold cryptography, this is a technique that's used to secure the key shares that are held by the multiple approvers, in this case of a cryptocurrency transaction. And with MPC, it will actually generate shares of a single key on each end user's approver device. And the shares are, a whole key is never created, the shares are never recombined to create a whole key, and the shares are never in the clear. So obviously these attributes are useful for mitigating the risk of key theft. And ultimately, MPC runs across these separate devices to verify that each share is available as part of their approval, and MPC will generate the signature that's recorded for the transaction. So if we go a little bit deeper into threshold signatures using MPC, again, it locally generates one key share on each approver's device. And much like MultiSig, at least M of n shares must be available to sign for the transaction to execute. With ThresholdSig, since the number of users doesn't increase the transaction size, it's much more feasible to have more than two parties actually sign and approve a transaction. So the number of parties can actually be up to 20. And the minimum number required to approve a transaction could be anything between 1 and 20, in theory. In practice, obviously, you're not going to want an excessive number of approvers because it can add delays in the actual approval process. But it clearly adds the ability, and as we go through, you'll see the transaction speed is not materially affected by increasing moderately the number of approvers. One of the attributes that I didn't talk about is the name or the word threshold in threshold signatures really ties to a key attribute where you can specify the threshold for the number of shares, not only that are required to approve a transaction, but how many shares could be corrupted and still allow a transaction to execute, and that type of detail. In this scenario, Sepior has implemented threshold signatures with MPC to generate a single signature from the M of M key shares using a technique called pre-signatures that can be generated in advance. And it really results in extremely rapid asynchronous approvals. And by asynchronous, I mean not all approvers have to be online with a computation running concurrently. They can be online independently at different times. But basically, the transactions are approved in the order of sub-millisecond for individual approvers once they approve it. And so you're really looking at milliseconds to low seconds when you add in latency for possible transport time and approving an overall transaction. So if we step through that similar model that we went through for 2 out of 3 multisig, here we have a 3 out of 3 threshold sig model. And this could be 3 out of 3, it could be 3 out of 4, 3 out of 5, whatever you want. This is highly customizable. But similar to multisig, each participant is an approver, but different from multisig. Each participant only has a share of a key. And when the end user initiates the transaction through their mobile app, their key share is provided to MPC to generate their portion of a signature. And also, that activity will notify the exchange of the transaction request. And just as with multisig, the exchange will go through the proper level of authentication of the end user to verify that we believe this is the correct end user and it's a valid transaction. If that's criteria satisfied, their key share will be provided for MPC to generate their portion of the signature. And then finally, the trusted third party will do the same. Now, the cool thing about bringing in a third approver is while the exchange is typically verifying the integrity of the end user, the trusted third party could actually be verifying the integrity of the exchange. For example, the exchange might have a setup where they don't want to allow an end user's account to have more than a certain number of transactions a day or a certain maximum withdrawal amount. But if a hacker somehow penetrated the account and changed those parameters, the trusted third party might be able to set up to verify that the parameters are consistent with the original requirement, and in that case, defeat a theft that might have occurred as a result of the exchange and the end user being hacked, and the trusted third party, in this case, would not approve it. Long story short, after all three parties have approved it, MPC will generate a single ECDA signature, which is recorded on the transaction record, which is added to the blockchain and sent to miners for processing. So what this does is it makes it very practical. You could clearly have a 2 out of 3 approval model if you wanted, but you can have a 3 out of 3 or more, and it still results in just a single ECDSA signature on the transaction record. So ThresholdSig is clearly a better multi-party approval scheme. It uses one distributed key in the form of key shares for all approvers. And as I mentioned, the entire key is never generated or recombined on any device at any time. It's never in the clear. And the single signature is generated using multi-party computation. And we can specify thresholds for what's the minimum number of approvers that have to approve before it executes, and how many of those parties could actually be corrupted and still allow a legitimate transaction to execute. Or if there's a share gets lost, how many or minimum number of shares that need to be available to generate key share recovery and execute signing, etc. So these are all definable parameters that can be highly customizable to different customers' requirements. But the bottom line is they're going to generate one ECDSA signature that, and the beauty of that single signature is that it basically eliminates the privacy concerns that we talked about with multisig, as well as the transaction size concerns. And so this means you can increase the number of approvers without increasing the transaction size. And since all of this is done off-chain, we can also maintain static account addresses much more consistently, which will be a very desirable attribute for business customers as we go forward. And threshold signatures can be implemented really with any single signature or multi-sig wallet that exists today. Clearly, there's a little bit of software development that has to be done on the back end, but from the end user experience and user interface, there's no changes that are required. So it's readily adaptable. So kind of moving along here, I think it's very safe to say that multisig, since it was specified as part of the original Bitcoin spec back in 2008, it's clearly more well-known. Ironically, threshold signatures have been around for a couple of decades in concept, but they've only recently become viable to implement in practice. And it's beautiful that they have, because as we've seen, threshold signatures are more efficient, more cost-effective, more scalable and resilient than multisig. And collectively, these attributes ultimately enable it to be more secure than multisig. So at this point, what I want to do is cut out of the PowerPoint deck and share my desktop. And on my desktop, what I have are two different wallets set up. The first wallet is the Sepior wallet demo. This is a threshold signature wallet that Sepior put together purely for demo purposes. We don't actually offer a wallet to the market. What we provide is the threshold signature technology to secure our customers' wallets for their customers. So we have the Sepior threshold sig wallet set up with a 3 of 3 approval scheme, meaning the end user, a broker, and a trusted third party all need to approve a transaction before funds can be withdrawn from the ThresholdSig wallet. And I've also set up a copay wallet on my iPhone, which I'm screencasting. And I'm going to go ahead and copy the address of the copay wallet. And I'm going to email that to myself. And once I get that, it's going to come through here momentarily, hopefully. Here it is. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that wallet into my ThresholdSig user interface. So this is that address there. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to send 0.0015 Satoshi from the Sepior ThresholdSig wallet to the Copay wallet. And when I hit send, the first of the 3 approvals will be applied by the end user. And then what will happen next is the transaction will be sent to the broker, where it will confirm that all of the criteria that are defined by the policies are satisfied. And if they're satisfied, it will automatically approve it. And the same is true for the trusted third party. If the policies that are specified for it are satisfied, it will also immediately approve it. So we'll go ahead and press send and see how quickly it transacts. Boom. So that was the cycle time for it to go through to complete the MPC calculations and generate the approval. So it sent 0.0015 Bitcoin from this wallet to my Copay wallet, and hopefully that will come across here momentarily. I'll go into the activity mode. And sure enough, we can see it right here that it came through just a few seconds ago. So that worked exactly as we had planned. But what if a hacker got into a system and somehow defeated the policies of the broker? Well, to simulate that, what I want to go ahead and do is create a policy for these wallets. I'm going to go ahead and copy these addresses and paste them in. And I'm going to set a policy that says we can't send more than 100,000 Satoshis from this wallet to this wallet. And I'll go ahead and save that policy. And I'll set up the same policy here on the trusted third party. And I'll go ahead and paste these addresses in there. So these are just whitelisting is an option where you can say from this address to this address, we can limit the amount of coins, or we can not allow coins to be sent to anything other than the whitelisted, or any of a wide range of policies can be specified. But we'll set up the same 100,000 policies here. And as you would expect, if I go ahead and send .0013, we'll just create a random amount. It should be below the amount, and sure enough, it's processed. And if we go back here to the audits, we'll see that the 2 previous transactions were both within guidelines and both were approved. Okay, so that's showing the wallet working is exactly as you'd expect. But what if a hacker got into the broker and somehow defeated the security systems? And let's go ahead and assume that's the case. I'll go ahead and let's say they, instead of 100,000, let's say they changed it to 10 million so that they could send far more Bitcoins than were really intended. And let's say that they deleted the old policy. So they've hacked into the end user's account, and they've hacked into the broker, and they're thinking, this is it, I'm going to drain these accounts. And so at this point, we're going to go ahead and send. We only have a limited amount of coins here, but let's go ahead and say, let's send almost all of it there. And let's see what happens. So we're going to go ahead and hit send, and immediately what showed up on my other screen is an alert to the wallet holder that the transaction was rejected. And if we come over and look at the audit for both and I've got to refresh this, for the broker and the trusted third party, what we see is, sure enough, since the broker had been hacked, the 500,000 Satoshi order made it through the broker, but the trusted third party blocked it because it was higher than the defined amount of 100,000 Satoshis. So this is an example, again, of ThresholdSig in action, and it's an illustration of how having that third party participate in there really brings a valuable added level of security to the whole equation. Okay, so that concludes our demo, and what I'm going to do now is step back into slideshow mode. So before we wrap, I wanted to provide a very brief overview on Sepior. And Sepior was founded back in 2014. It was really a spin out from another company that a group of our co-founders were part of. And they saw the need for a solution that like Sepior, and they established Sepior in 2014 in Aarhus, Denmark. The company is privately held. We're well funded. And we're really recognized as a worldwide leader in threshold cryptography. And that really goes back to our people. Our core cryptography team is recognized as RSA award-winning team. And when you go through and look at the members of our organization, you'll find some highly respected cryptographers as well as practitioners of security solutions. And what we've been focused on really is leading the productization of MPC-based solutions for security innovation. And what we focused on to date is really around wallet security, as we're describing on the webinar here today with Threshold Signature wallet security. We're also providing blockchain security solutions to manage both the confidentiality and privacy of data that's entered on permission blockchains. And we are also working with SaaS and MSSP providers where we've developed a white label cloud security platform that supports bring your own key and security as a service type solutions for key management as a service. We've got a number of customers in the field of threshold cryptography. Our largest and most well-known customer is SBI, which is based in Japan. This is formerly SoftBank Investments. SBI is one of the world's largest financial services companies, and they launched VC Trade recently. And this is the first bank-backed government-licensed cryptocurrency exchange. And they purposely sought out and selected Sepior's ThresholdSig solution because they wanted to really set a new benchmark for security in the industry. So just kind of wrapping up here, and then we'll dive into Q&A. If we summarize what we've covered here, I think it's fair to say that thefts are significant and increasing, and that brokers and exchanges are really the primary targets for these hackers. And that when we're talking about the wallet security, we're really talking about private key security. And within that, single signature provides the least secure solution, but ironically, it's used in about 70% of the transactions today. And MultiSig is substantially more secure, but it has a number of undesirable attributes, as we reviewed earlier. ThresholdSig really provides the highest level of security without the downsides of MultiSig, and it's been chosen by some of the largest financial service providers in the business. And the technology is available for licensing for Sepior. I'm not going to go into those details on this call, but clearly you can contact us and we'll follow up as appropriate. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and unmute all of our participants, and we're going to open this up for Q&A. Amit, are you able to join us here? There you are. Amit, can you share some of the questions that have been submitted?
Yeah, thank you very much, Frank. So I think we got a couple of questions during the presentation, and if any more come in, I can see them and I'll try to answer them. So here's one about the demo, and it says, you showed a 3 out of 3 approval scheme. What if one of the client broker or TTP are compromised or device is lost? So the way to answer this is that in this particular protocol that we demonstrated, all 3 parties must approve a transaction, otherwise the protocol aborts. Effectively, the transaction doesn't happen. But if, say, the mobile device that the client is using has been lost or stolen or something, the other 2 parties that are in the protocol, the broker and the TTP, trusted third party, can actually generate the third share, which would then be loaded into the replacement device. They can generate a share, but they cannot sign a transaction. So all three are still required to participate in generating the ECDSA signature, but any two can produce the third share. Now, this is just a specific implementation, but pretty much anything that can be imagined can be done using our crypto library. So that was the example there. And a related question is, in a disaster like a nuclear scenario where the client broker and the TTP are not available to transact, or lost or compromised, how do you recover the keys? And the way we would do that is effectively because MPC allows the export or the extraction of encrypted key shares from the system. Those shares can be escrowed in any secure location. That could be hardware, software, or third-party escrow service. But the escrow service, of course, doesn't have the MPC protocol to generate an ECDSA signature. So all it is cold storage or safe storage for these encrypted key shares. So that's something that's also possible. Let me see some of the other questions. Okay, so there's a question about why Sepior's threshold signature scheme is better than some of the others that have been made public. And what we say to this is that our implementation has been designed for a real world scenario and use case, and an exchange that's required to meet a certain number of transactions per second. So effectively, this is the throughput design of the system. And our design goals for this are equivalent to what you might see in commercial credit card or payment type teams. So this is a very high performance system. And the way we're able to do this, I think Frank mentioned some of the primitives that we use, but one concept is this notion of pre-signatures that are loaded onto the signing party devices, whether the server or the mobile device. So effectively, we can differentiate ourselves by saying that we have a proven and high performance system, and we haven't really seen that from others yet. There's a question related to standards. You've said that multi-signature is a standard that's been around since 2008. Is threshold signature a standard? Effectively what's required is a standard ECDSA signature. So to the blockchain and to the transaction, it looks like a standard ECDSA signature. And this has been this is an ANSI X9 standard that's been around for a long time. So from the protocol of the blockchain and the parties, everything looks standard. The threshold scheme is more of an implementation, and it's sort of behind the scenes. But as a footnote, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, just I think a couple of weeks ago, held their first workshop on standardizing threshold cryptography-based schemes, and one of their items in the agenda is threshold ECDSA. And there are a number of proposals for this, but effectively the standards efforts are now beginning around the threshold ECDSA, and I think we're likely to see something reasonably soon. Okay, I think we have one more question. That might be the last one. How is threshold signature, Sepior's threshold signature is packaged, sold, and licensed? Frank also mentioned this. What we have today is effectively crypto libraries or software libraries that are available for a variety of client devices and servers. So these libraries are available for iOS, Android, and some other types of clients that we're looking at. And also on the server side, it's available in Java as a microservices. So effectively, it's a crypto library that's licensed. And the way we provide that license has been it's been a pay-as-you-go model. It's been based on transaction volume, but almost any commercial scheme is possible for us at this point. I think, Frank, we don't have any more questions, so I think that probably wraps up the Q&A session here, unless some other questions come in.
Yeah, we'll do just a final check. If anybody else has any other questions, we'll take them. Otherwise, I think we'll go ahead and call it a wrap. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us and for participating today. And if you have any questions, please contact us and let us know how we can assist. And we look forward to next steps. Take care and have a great day.